A senior health service figure has criticised the government's response to the coronavirus pandemic, accusing ministers of making decisions on the hoof for apparently political motives. Chris Hobson, who speaks for NHS trusts in England, complained that hospitals were given no notice before yesterday's announcements that all their staff would have to start wearing surgical masks from a week on Monday. Mr Hobson said there'd also been no warning about changes to the rules for hospital visitors, adding that frontline staff shouldn't be expected to turn on a sixpence with little time to prepare.
A BBC investigation has found there were no gowns, visors, swabs or body bags in the government's pandemic stockpile when COVID-19 reached the UK. NHS staff say they are being put at risk because of the shortage of personal protective equipment. The government said it has taken the right steps and is doing everything it can to increase stocks.
Tens of thousands of people
The
have
investigation
taken part
by
in mass
BBC
protests
Panorama
across the United Kingdom against racism, in
in
defiance of government appeals to stay at home because of coronavirus. Large numbers turned out, many wearing face coverings, to show support for Black Lives Matter protests in London, Manchester, Cardiff, Leicester and Sheffield. They were largely peaceful, but in London this evening, some demonstrators clashed with police in Westminster.
There was jubilation in the crowd as a demonstrator placed a noose around the neck of the 125-year-old statue of the slave trader Edward Colson and toppled it from its plinth. It was then dragged through streets and thrown into the harbour, a swift end to a long campaign for the removal of the sculpture. Avon and Somerset police are investigating.
The cypress trees at Claydon move with the morning breeze. Evergreen, they point skywards, drawn up to the sunlight. If you listen, you hear them whisper, we were there, we were there. Grown from little pine cones, brought back from the Crimea. Rooted in English soil, watered with tears. If you listen, you'll hear them whisper, we were there, we were there. A wise man once told me, early in my career, if a person has any true ideas, it's their duty not to let them be lost. So tell the world what you think, share your experience. We brought nothing into the world, and with us take nothing out. All we leave behind us is the work we carried out. Do we really need to say we were there, we were there? Bury me in glory, no ceremony do I desire. Don't turn me into a statue, a relic to be admired. Let the work speak for itself, let its legacy live on. The cypress trees at Claydon were cut down years ago, as if they never existed, The ground lies empty now, but deep underneath the soil, the roots are there, they're still there. I touched your words, letters written, now preserved.
Can you think of a time in history when a person's done all the work and received none of the credit? Can you think of a time when a person's reputation was damaged by unsubstantiated rumours? Can you think of a time when a person's work was undermined through discussion about their appearance? Can you think of a time when a woman's opinion was accepted unequivocally? Can you think of a time when a person had political power and influence on an issue, despite being officially barred from the debate? Can you think of a time when a man was asked when he planned to get married or start a family? How many times can you think of when a woman has been celebrated for her part in scientific discovery and advancement? Can you think of a time when a woman put herself forward for recognition or reward? Can you think of a time when a man's contribution was ruled out because he was deemed to be hysterical or emotional? Can you think of a time when a boy was called pretty or a girl was told to stop crying like a baby? Once upon a time, in a part of the world far, far away known as the Raj, there lived a man called Guzur. Guzur was a lucky man. He owned lands, which he had inherited from his father, who in turn had inherited from his father, and so on. Guzur had a servant called Otir. Otir was an unlucky man. He worked all day from sunrise to sunset, with only a few grains of rice and the shirt on his back to show for it. One day Otir had had enough and left in search of more luck elsewhere. Guzur was angry. Good workers were hard to find. He went to his wardrobe and took out a wooden safe. From his pocket he took out a set of brass keys and unlocked the safe. He lifted the heavy wooden lid which creaked at the hinge, and he removed a pile of crumpled and dusty papers, which he sifted through until he found the one he was looking for. Guzur took the paper to the court and declared, "I have a deed, signed by Otir, stating that he must work for me until his debt is repaid." And the clerk and the people in the court shook their heads and looked at the floor, knowing that a labourer like Otir could never repay such a large sum. A date was set for the court case, but Otir did not attend. He knew he had no defence. A warrant was issued for Otir's arrest, and a bailiff sent to seize the few possessions he had, including the necklace that he had given to his wife as a present on the 30th anniversary of their wedding day. Otir was taken to the court, where he was presented with a choice: return to work or go to prison. Otir returned to work, his debt now increased by the cost of the court case. He worked for 90 long days on only a few grains of rice and the shirt on his back. And once more, Otir had enough, and he decided to leave in search of more luck. And once again, Guzur went to the court, and once more Otir faced the choice of work or prison. And so the cycle continued for as long as Otir could survive on a few grains of rice and the shirt on his back. And the clerk and the people continued to shake their heads and look at the floor, knowing that Otir could not read or write, and knowing that the law decrees that a man's signature can bind him to a life of servitude, whether he understands the letter of the law or not. Once upon a time, in a part of the world far, far away, there lived a lucky man. Once upon a time, in a part of the world far, far away, there lived an unlucky man.
We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. How can we judge the value of a person if our first thought is what we get in return? We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. Should we not rise up as people for every person to have power of their own? We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. Prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand. We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We prefer to turn our heads away, saying we don't understand.
Can you think of a time in history when a person has done all of the work but received none of the reward? Can you think of a time from your past when you've gone to lots of efforts and somebody's come in at the last minute to sabotage your efforts? It's like the time when I spent 4 months planning to host a family Christmas. It all started in September with the traditional baking of the cake, giving everybody a call to make sure they could have their wish by proxy. I spent more money feeding that cake brandy than I spent on feeding the cats. Florence Nightingale spent 4 decades working on the improvement of sanitation and healthcare in India. I spent hours and hours exchanging emails about every individual person's dietary requirements. What sort of brand and what type of soya or alternative milk was Dad drinking these days? Even though I knew he'd finish his Christmas lunch with an Irish coffee, and on the top would be floating cream from a cow. And then there was trying to balance the nutritional value of every meal, the carbohydrates to protein ratio for my marathon-obsessed brother. And I spent hours arranging and rearranging that seating plan to try and reduce arguments. Florence Nightingale realised that there was little evidence in existence on the health of the British Army in India, so she created standardised questionnaires and personally sent one to each of the army stations across India. I became the go-to person for all things Christmas in our household, from planning the Secret Santa to making sure that we had all the latest and most up-to-date versions of all the board games. Florence became known as the go-to person for all information on India. To begin with, her work focused on the health of the British Army, but she soon realised that the British Army's health was dependent on the health of the Indian people, so she became an expert on the supply of water, land irrigation, construction of canals, agricultural practices, and especially issues about the poor workers. In the lead up to Christmas, my kitchen was a no-go area. The cupboards were overflowing and the sides were full of every condiment and sauce known to mankind. There were boxes of crackers, boxes of mince pie, packets of different crisps, pickled beetroot, pickled cabbage, pickled onions, pickled eggs, pickled gherkins, just to make sure nobody was left out. Florence devoted a whole room of her apartment to her work on India. Her apartment became known to MPs and officials as the Little War Office, and when she moved house, it took 3 vans to cart all of her papers with her. I got up at 4 a.m. on Christmas Day to ensure everything was timed to perfection, least of all the turkey and the roast potatoes, which I don't even eat. Florence analysed the questionnaires that she received meticulously so that she could compile her 28 report that she'd been asked to submit by the Prime Minister for a government's official Blue Book. All was going well with lunch on Christmas Day, a couple of minor hiccups, and then the incident over the breast and the legs. I went to the shed to collect the Christmas cake. I opened the shed door and the whiff of brandy cleansed my face. I reached over the bikes to pick up the massive Tupperware that I'd bought especially for this ginormous cake. But somehow, I must have forgotten to clip the lid back on the box. It was open, and rats had managed to claw their way through 3 layers of tin foil and feast on my magnificent cake. Florence submitted her report, and she wrote to the printers 3 times for updates on progress, and she managed to get hold of a pre-release copy. She trawled through the thousands of papers, but found that her 28 pages was missing. She inquired what had happened and was told that a junior clerk had been asked to edit the report, and since the printing block was now destroyed, her contribution was lost. In my attempt to salvage Christmas, I got into the car and went round all the shops I could think of to find a corner shop open. I returned home with a Battenberg. Florence spent her own money resolving her situation. She decided to publish her report for herself, and she bound it in a red cloth cover, and it was nicknamed Florence's Little Red Book. Copies of the Little Red Book were sent to all of Florence's influential contacts, including members of the national press and Queen Victoria, and Florence ensured that a copy was sent to the House of Commons for the national record. The Little Red Book was credited as achieving immense good for healthcare in India. It was known for its sarcastic tone and its direct criticism of the establishment. No such thing was said about my Battenberg.
We don't care for the voiceless millions living on a few grains of rice and the shirt on their back. We pray